Croatia lies only a couple hundred kilometers from my home country, just across the Adriatic Sea. Yet, when I traveled there this past July, I realized I knew very little about it. I was convinced I was going to an Eastern European country. I expected sprawling housing blocks, Soviet-style cuisine, and that impression of having traveled back to the years of the Cold War that I enjoyed so much when I visited places like Belgrade or Moscow. Well, I could not have been more wrong. In truth, Croatia has always been more west than east, since Roman times in fact, when Emperor Diocletian, born himself in Dalmatia, decided to split the empire into two to make it easier to rule. So modern-day Croatia fell under the influence of Rome, while modern-day Serbia began to gravitate towards Byzantium, the city we now call Istanbul. In time, this separation sealed the fate of Croatia as an overwhelmingly Catholic country in the middle of the predominantly Orthodox Balkan region. Croatia has a complex and tormented history. Over the centuries, it was occupied, dismembered, and arbitrarily stitched back together by countless armies, nations, and empires. Her dreams of independence often clashing with the statehood ambitions of neighboring Serbia. It only achieved independence in 1991, when it severed ties with Yugoslavia. It is perhaps because of their centuries-long fight for existence that today's Croatians have such a strong sense of national identity. Of the many rulers that succeeded each other, the Venetians are perhaps the ones who left the most evident footprint in Croatia. And nowhere is this clearer than in the northern region of Istria, where our trip began. Here, we're just a stone's throw away from Italy, and as we walked the streets of Rovinj, the similarities with Venice were hard to ignore. Many of the town's buildings, painted in bright colors, reminded me of the island of Burano in the Venetian lagoon, while the towering belfry of the Church of Saint Euphemia is a clear nod to St. Mark's. It might be built on a hill, but Rovinj is like a miniature version of Venice. At one point, Rovinj even belonged to Italy from 1918 to 1947, and the Italian influence is still very strong here. In fact, most locals are bilingual, so don't be surprised if they refer to the town as Rovigno. With its round shape, colorful buildings, cute alleys, and elegant squares, Rovinj is like a postcard. I really enjoyed strolling around the cute streets of the old town, and marveling at the fantastic views of the Adriatic all around it. It is easy to see why this is one of Croatia's most popular destinations. If you're into ancient ruins, I highly recommend you visit nearby Pula, home to one of the best preserved Roman structures I have ever seen. The oval-shaped arena was completed in 14 AD and later expanded by Emperor Vespasian to reach its current size. With a length of 130 meters and a width of 105, this is the sixth largest Roman amphitheater in the world. Another impressive and beautifully preserved monument in Pula is the Temple of Augustus, built at the same time as the arena in what is today one of the city's main squares. Walk up to the hilltop fortress to enjoy unrivaled views of Pula and its shipyards, which represent such an important part of the local economy. Much like the rest of Croatia, Istria boasts a beautiful coastline. The picturesque town of Rabac, on the eastern coast of Istria, is the perfect example of why each year so many tourists flock to this country and its craggy 1,700 kilometer long coastline. 5,700 if we consider the hundreds of islands. While finding a sandy beach is harder than one would think, the pebbles make for wonderfully clear water pretty much everywhere in Croatia. Next on our itinerary was the lively city of Zadar. Its historical center is built on a peninsula, much like Rovinj, and boasts wonderful views of Ugljan Island and the rest of the Zadar archipelago. We enter the old town from the south, through the monumental land gate built in 1543 next to the Foča harbor. The sculpture of St. Mark's winged lion stands there as a majestic reminder of the long Venetian rule. From here, you will get an idea of just how imposing Zadar's fortifications are. They were built by the Venetians in the 16th century to strengthen the medieval walls and to protect the city from Ottoman attacks. They are today a UNESCO World Heritage Site. There's plenty to see inside the walls too. You can start at Five Wells Square, it's not hard to understand what it's named after, and the adjacent Petar Zoranic Square, with its tall trees and towering Roman column. Busy People's Square has been the center of Zadar's public life since the Middle Ages. It is known for its impressive collection of pretty buildings, in particular the elegant city loggia, and right opposite, the city guard with its 19th century clock tower. This is also a great place to watch the world go by while sipping a cup of coffee. To me, the real beating heart of Zadar is the area around the Roman Forum. Here, the ancient ruins integrate beautifully with the surroundings and offer a spectacular backdrop for musical events, together with the pre-Romanesque church of Saint Donatus. Right behind Saint Donatus is the Cathedral of Saint Anastasia, with its pretty bell tower. Climb to the top for incomparable views of Zadar, as long as you're not scared of heights and don't mind sweating a little bit. If you're interested in entering the church, bear in mind that you will not be allowed in if you're not dressed appropriately. No matter how hot it might be outside, Croatians seem to be pretty conservative when it comes to attire in church. Come evening, join the many couples, families and tourists gathering along the Nova Riva seafront to watch the incandescent disk of the sun disappear in the sea, a spectacle afforded by Zadar's west-facing location. No wonder the city's sunsets are legendary. At the end of the Nova Riva, you will also find the city's coolest sights. Both were conceived by local architect Nikola Bajic. The grid into the sun is a giant circle made of 300 glass plates representing the sun. It stores solar energy during the day and then uses it to produce a great light show when it gets dark. A few meters away, we go from light to sound, with the sea organ using its system of tubes to convert the movement of the waves into an ever-changing, hypnotic melody. We sat on the marble steps of the organ and let the waves play us a tune to accompany our sunset viewing. What a way to end the day. Zadar is also the ideal base for excursions in the beautiful Kornati National Park, an archipelago of more than 100 islands located some 30 kilometers south of the city. You can buy excursions to Kornati in one of the many stalls along the Nova Riva. Just make sure you ask to travel on a small boat, unless you want to share your experience with dozens of others. The price difference is neglectable. Kornati is one of the best places to enjoy the turquoise waters of Croatia. Swimming here is a dream, and I was actually really impressed by how good the snorkeling was too. At one point, we even got to see a pod of dolphins. The landscape in Kornati is beautiful. The dull color of these dry, barren islands contrasting starkly with the many shades of blue of the sea. Here's a curious piece of trivia for you. The names of two of the Kornati islets, Babina Guzica and Kurbavela, mean respectively Granny's Butt and Big Prostitute. These colorful monikers were given to the islands to mock the Austrian surveyors who had come here to chart the archipelago in the 1800s. A short deviation inland on our way south along the Dalmatian coast led us to the famous Krka National Park. Perhaps we have a different definition of national park where I am from, but when we reached the famous Kradinsky Buk waterfall, we were actually quite disappointed to find hordes of sunbathers and stalls selling hot dogs and soft drinks. The place looked like a city park on a busy weekend. Beautiful as the fall is, we were completely put off by the overcrowded trails, especially considering that no one was wearing a face mask. Like in the rest of Croatia, you could have been excused for thinking that people have not heard we're in the middle of a pandemic. After cutting short our visit to Krka, we decided to head to nearby Sibenik instead. Here, the crowds were gone. The extreme heat probably had something to do with it, and we were able to enjoy a quaint town with pretty alleys and a stunning cathedral. Sibenik's exquisite architecture dates back to the town's heyday, the first 2 centuries of Venetian domination, starting in 1412. By the 17th century, Sibenik, or Sebeniko, had become the largest town in Dalmatia, before war and plague stopped its rise in the mid-1640s. The town's cathedral might just be the prettiest church I've seen on our trip to Croatia. A few kilometers down the coast is the unapologetically attractive island town of Trogir. Exploring its alleys felt like stepping back in time. Trogir has retained its Hellenistic street plan, which over time has been enriched by successive rulers with imposing fortifications, magnificent palaces and beautiful churches. So much impressive architecture is packed into such a small place. If you're short on time, I suggest you visit the Camerlengo Castle, an impressive fortification dominating the palm-fringed Riva embankment, and the stunning Cathedral of St. Lawrence. While the view from the bell tower is worth the visit alone, the real reason to come here is the wonderfully ornate portal created by local sculptor Master Radovan, a masterpiece with bas-reliefs representing religious scenes from the life of Christ, mixed with animals and mythical creatures like centaurs and mermaids. The insane number of restaurants in Trogir told us the story of a town, and indeed a country, that largely depends on tourism. When we visited in late July, however, they were mostly empty, courtesy of COVID-19. I must say, throughout Croatia we saw very few places that could be described as crowded. The locals we spoke to told us that there were only about 25% of the visitors the country normally receives. While this made for a more enjoyable experience for us, it is hard to imagine how tough this 2020 must be for people working in the hospitality and tourism industries around the world. Our next stop was Split, and if there is one thing it was not, is empty. This is the second largest city in Croatia after the capital Zagreb, and I realized how lively it is the moment we stepped off the bus. Half a dozen ferries filled the port, ready to welcome commuters and tourists, while nearby, people filled the river waterfront and perused souvenir stalls in Rojeva Street. Split charmed me from the very first second. The city center is pretty compact, although it took us a while to get our bearings in the maze of alleys of Diocletian's palace. This is Split's #1 site, and its name could not be more misleading. It was conceived as a residence for Emperor Diocletian, who was born in nearby Salona, but the palace today is in reality the historical core of Split. Here, cool cafes and shops stand shoulder to shoulder with ancient buildings. Diocletian's palace is square-shaped, with 4 gates welcoming visitors on its 4 sides, each named after a metal: gold, silver, bronze, and iron. It is dominated by the elegant silhouette of the 57-meter bell tower of the Cathedral of St. Domnius, the city's patron saint. The beautiful peristyle with its iconic columns is the heart of the imperial complex. Right next to it, the actual church, an octagonal structure that once housed the mausoleum of Diocletian. Next door, through a narrow alley, you can reach the baptistery, which once was the Temple of Jupiter. Standing guard in front of it, one of the 12 sphinxes that Diocletian brought back from Egypt. Don't miss the bas-reliefs on the portal, and inside, on one of the rood screens of the baptismal font, the first representation of a Croatian king. The palace is equally impressive underground. From a structural standpoint, the cellars are the same as the chambers above, which gives you a very clear idea of what the place looked like in ancient times. In the Middle Ages, refugees found shelter here, as did 2 of Daenerys' dragons in the popular TV series Game of Thrones. Leaving the palace through the Iron Gate, although you will barely notice having left it, you will arrive in People's Square, with City Hall and the Romanesque clock that's been telling the people of Split the time for centuries. Nearby Fruit Square, named after the market that used to be held here, is also beautiful. You can't miss its imposing Venetian tower, once part of a fortress, and the Baroque facade of the Milesi Palace. From here, it's only a few steps to the bustling Riva, lined with cafes and bars on one side, and stalls on the other. This seafront offers lovely views of Split's port, and is a great place to sit down and relax. At the end of the Riva, you'll find Republic Square, made to resemble Venice's St. Mark's, although I couldn't help but find the comparison rather unmerciful. Naturally, Split has several beaches. Bačvice and Firule are some of the most popular ones east of the city center, but they tend to get very crowded and the water is not great. We have better luck in Kažuni Beach, on the western tip of the peninsula, where we found cleaner water and slightly less people. It goes without saying, one doesn't come to Split for the beaches, but for the city's impressive historical heritage. Personally, I think the reason I liked it so much is that it felt like a real place, with grit and personality, especially when you compare it to other destinations in Croatia, like Trogir or Dubrovnik, that try so hard to be shiny and perfect for the tourists that they end up losing authenticity and almost feel like a theme park. Join me in my next video as we island hop our way south, all the way to the beautiful city of Dubrovnik. Wanna come with?